the very best of our journalists is having to work overseas. And on returning to this country, Kit Klarenberg, the best of British journalists, was apprehended by the police for terrorism, as happened to the Honourable Craig Murray, happened to Richard Medhurst, happened to Kit Klarenberg. But when you see the sheer power of his pen, you can see why it strikes terror in the hearts of the powerful and the establishment forces in Britain. I'm very glad to say he joins us now. He is an investigative journalist at the Grey Zone, the best news site anywhere in the world. Kit, thanks for joining us. Before getting on to some of the incredible material you've been producing of late, indeed for a long time, but of late I think you have reached a real purple patch. Let me take your view as it were, an involuntary expat. Keir Starmer's facing a wipeout tomorrow, just 10 months after a landslide parliamentary majority. Where did it all go wrong, do you think?
Well, I mean, I like to make the gag a farewell to Starmer of late, because I think that his goose is cooked. He is on his last legs. I don't think that he has very much left longer in power, but of course he's not in power. He's just doing whatever MI5 and MI6 and his controllers in the Ministry of Defence tell him to do. Now, as I drew attention to on Twitter, there was a little noticed report in the Times, I believe it was 4 or 5 days ago, which announced that the UK was scrapping any and all plans to send troops to Ukraine. And it had this absolutely golden excerpt in it, in which it claimed that the UK has always been opposed to deploying soldiers to Ukraine. It was France that wanted a more muscular approach. This is after months and months of bellicose, dangerous statements and commitments and pledges by Starmer that he would support Ukraine for as long as it takes, to the tune of billions per year, while pensioners are dying of cold because they can't afford their energy bills. He openly and repeatedly stated that he would commit not peacekeeping forces but regular British soldiers to fight alongside Ukraine. This was confirmed by John Healey all of a week ago, I believe. He spoke of deploying British jets to police the skies over Ukraine. And now, apparently none of this happened, and it was all the French's idea in the first place anyway. To have put himself at such a high level and to have effectively checkmated himself, the only way out of that is down. We have seen also in recent weeks the bizarre efforts to boost and amplify Wes Streeting as somehow a way of appealing to working class voters. Wes Streeting being a unctuous, charmless scumbag funded by the private health industry, who is the health secretary, came within a few hundred votes of losing his seat to a pro-Palestinian independent candidate with zero money, institutional backing or media support at the last election. If that's the best they can do, Labour are in trouble. But I might round out this section by noting, I mean, you referred to the lesser of two evils in Canada's election. In the UK, we have the evil of multiple lessers. Every single British political party remains, despite this recent development that actually, after all, there shall be no British troops in Ukraine, they remain committed to keeping this proxy war grinding on interminably at unsustainable human, material and financial cost. Labour, the Conservatives, the Lib Dems, the Greens, they are all pro-war, they are all pro-NATO. There is no choice.
And reform, don't forget them. Nigel Farage, once accused of taking the Kremlin shilling. He's right in line. He's standing shoulder to shoulder with Keir Starmer. And ooh la la, was the French that done it. Such mendacity is difficult to fathom. We all saw Keir Starmer say We saw his lips move. We saw John Healey's lips move as they pledged thousands of British soldiers as a reassurance force in Ukraine, and now they're asking us to believe they never wanted that in the first place. I've never known a British government that not just lies so much, Kit, but is caught lying so much.
Yes, well, I mean, I think that the Labour have so far relied on a liberal commentariat which is willing to not only make excuses for their lies, but also actually justify it as legitimate statecraft and political theatre. I mean, we've got to bear in mind that Starmer was elected on a clear platform of maintaining all of Corbyn's very modest social democratic policies, and made a series of 5 pledges, and was briefing mainstream journalists during his leadership campaign. Were being briefed on the fact that actually we're not going to follow any of this, and we're just lying in order to get into power and then start purging the party of any and all progressive dissident elements, which is exactly what's come to pass in the most brutal, bloody, callous way imaginable. Although I did see that Momentum recently said, well, if you're unhappy with the direction of the Labour Party and you're a socialist, you should rejoin and attempt to push them back in the right direction, because that's worked so well on every occasion it's been tried. I mean, this is, it's quite remarkable. You look at polls. This is the most unpopular government in history, led by the least trusted, most unpopular Prime Minister in history, which replaced the previously least popular and trusted Prime Minister and government in British history. It's really quite extraordinary. There is a huge upsurge of demand from average citizens for change in the UK, and they're being offered 0 solutions or alternatives by anyone, including, I might add, mainstream left-wing figures, if you can even call them that, like, say, Owen Jones, or norovirus media, as I like to call them. That 10 years ago, they would be brought onto the BBC to be laughed at and mocked as these Marxist lunatics with nice-sounding ideas, but, we can't afford it, and they're not realistic, and blah, blah, blah. That was their purpose. Fast forward to today, and they are not saying anything. They're not proposing anything. And then meanwhile, I saw this morning, there was a survey of major countries in the world released, which showed the UK was amongst the lowest ranked countries internationally for human flourishing in well-being. I wonder why that is. Could it be 15 years of failed, destructive, suicidal austerity policies? I don't know.
I can hear Iberia calling me from this septic isle as you speak. It's definitely a very unhappy place, for sure, and with not much immediate prospect. I mean, Wes Streeting's nobody's idea of someone who's going to turn things around, apart from Mr. McTernan, which is why he said Labour is toast, because he's very close to Wes Streeting, and this is a clear sign that Wes Streeting is about to make a push. But 2, not 1, but 2 of your recent pieces have been monumental pieces of work, and I take my hat off to you for them. Let me deal with the first one and finish with the second. You reveal that the catastrophe of the Ukrainian army's invasion of Kursk in Russia, which has led perhaps to 75,000 Ukrainian casualties, was not just a British idea, but was actually effectively run by the British military and intelligence apparatus. Give us the short version of that, will you?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so the short version is, as many people may remember, in August 2024, the Ukrainians sprang a surprise counter-invasion of Kursk. Now, my immediate gut reaction, based on my prior reporting on Britain's leading role in this nightmarish proxy conflict, was this was probably an insane idea cooked up by the British, and this was subsequently confirmed by mainstream reporting in the Times of London. The British planned this, they oversaw it, they provided the bulk of the equipment, but moreover, they sought to explicitly and openly advertise their involvement in this in order to try and encourage other Western proxy war sponsors, of course, the US being foremost amongst them, into becoming formal belligerents in the conflict, which is to say, all-out hot war between NATO and Russia. The US didn't quite take the bait. Neither did Germany, whose Leopard tanks were smashed to smithereens almost universally during this god-awful military operation in Kursk, which was always going to be complete suicide. Now, I might add as well that, yes, this counter-invasion, quote unquote, has now come to a total end. The area that has been completely liberated of any and all Ukrainian soldiers, countless taken prisoner, tens of thousands injured or killed, and a vast amounts of expensive, difficult, if not impossible to replace Western military vehicles and armor and artillery left for the Russians to pick at. It has been a disaster on every conceivable front, on top of attempting to encourage deeper, more open involvement by Western powers in this quagmire. It was also hoped it would give Ukraine a bargaining chip in negotiations. As Donald Trump has said, the Ukrainians have no cards now. You know, they're all they can do is, and I saw just before we went live that a Ukrainian envoy is flown into Washington to sign peace deals, but there are doubts that that's even going to happen because they want to discuss the terms, which the Americans are not willing to do. You know, this was a total waste of life and money and energy and time and much more besides. And I might add that, yes, I mean, you are, as I have consistently reported and has been confirmed in the mainstream media, if there is a major military catastrophe in which Ukraine has been engaged, you can bet that in 99%, if not 100% of cases, it would be the British masterminding the catastrophe. I reported a few weeks ago, based on a New York Times expose on the extent of US support for the war in Ukraine, that the British took a lead role in encouraging Kiev to push ahead with its 2023 counteroffensive, which was, much vaunted, and we were told was going to change military history. In the event, again, losses may have exceeded 100,000 people to regain 0.25% of the territory lost to Russia in the initial waves of the invasion. The New York Times noted the British were key to pushing the Ukrainians to go ahead with this, even though they said they weren't ready to do it, and trying to allay US concerns about this going ahead. That my reporting was then confirmed by the Times of London in a very bizarre piece, which seemed to try and talk up Britain's role in this as somehow heroic and Churchillian, when it was, again, one of the biggest military catastrophes in modern history, like Gallipoli 2.0.
Exactly, another Churchill catastrophe. Why is that, Kit? A lot of people think it's because the British hate communism, as if Russia was still a communist country, but it long predates Bolshevism, predates Putin, Bolshevism. It goes way back. What is this ancient and peculiar hatred of the British for the Russians?
Well, Russia is a country which has never been never. I mean, save for the god awful 90s, the grotesque excesses of the 90s. It's a country that has never been the West has that particularly Britain has never been able to subjugate. It has always been viewed by Britain as a barrier to Anglo and subsequently Anglo-American expansion into numerous areas of the world. Now, you've got to bear in mind, even when Russia was effectively led by members of the British royal family in the form of the Romanovs, they were still a wrecker in international affairs from the perspective of London. They supported the independence fighters in the American War of Independence against the British. They supported the North versus the South in the American Civil War. America, in return, was on Russia's side during the Crimean War. And this is despite, yes, them being ultimately led by members of the same family. You have the Russian Revolution. Well, they end up killing the Romanovs and therefore killing some of the British ruling elite's own. That's never forgivable. Now, you've got to bear in mind, in 1917, and this is something I've written about for my website. It has the title "The Anglo-French Plot to Dismember Russia." Okay, in 1917, after after the Bolsheviks signed the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk with Germany, France and Britain, along with a large number of other countries, including Japan and the US, they invaded the burgeoning Soviet Union. And it was explicitly in the manner of Godfather 2, where they carve up the cake of Cuba between the different mafia dons. It was about subjugating and Russia, tearing it up into easily exploitable chunks, due to its vast untapped resources. The French got the coal, the British got the timber. The entire map of Russia was divided in that manner. The Russians managed to successfully fight back that invasion, and ever since, yes, with the exception of the 1990s, the West has not been able to bring them to heel. In my neck of the woods, the adopted neck of the woods, the Balkans, the British are very, very, very active. Cities like Belgrade and Sarajevo are crawling with MI6 operatives are up to no good and causing trouble. And and then meanwhile, British think tanks talk about Russian aggression and Russian meddling in the Balkans. While there are British quote-unquote peacekeepers openly walking in public in Bosnia and Kosovo and other places with their weapons drawn. If that's not an invasion and occupation, I don't know. But allegedly, they're there to to guard against the risk of Russian aggression. Who's the aggressor here? It's really quite extraordinary, and I think as well. This is that enduring desire to get their hands on Russia's resources. It is writ large in the leaked documents that I've reported on for Grey Zone related to the operations of Project Alchemy, which is this Ministry of Defense created secret cell of military veterans and intelligence operatives who came up with all sorts of wild ideas for keeping Ukraine fighting at all costs. That's a verbatim quote. They explicitly talk about wanting to get their hands on Russia's oil and gas reserves, which are, the world's largest, Russia's minerals, that sort of thing. That mindset has gone nowhere. And it has led us to where we are now, with NATO disarmed, Ukraine effectively lacking a male population. Yes, the all along the enduring risk of this escalating into World War III.
Well, let's come up to date. Your latest piece, again, a piece of brilliant reporting. You, as it were, draw together all these disparate elements. The British, unable, unwilling, now claiming they never wanted to field forces in Ukraine. The French, according to Starmer, as you say, the real muscular belligerents, they can't. Nobody can. Nobody in Europe has the men or the money, by jingo, to field any kind of army against Russia without the US cavalry, as you put it. And the US cavalry isn't going to show up, is it?
No. Well, I mean, this is what caught my eye was that Politico published this very lengthy piece, which was, I mean, Politico is worth reading because it's elites talking with elites, in the same way that the Financial Times is, the best of a bad bunch, which is not necessarily saying very much. But Politico published this article on how the US cavalry isn't coming, and its main thrust is pushing this now familiar narrative that, because of Donald Trump, the transatlantic alliance is under threat and Europe cannot rely on the US for defense anymore. And this is, exclusively and explicitly due to Trump being in the White House. And it went on to document in pretty forensic detail the extent to which all of Europe's defense planning, infrastructure, intelligence capabilities, and everything under the sun necessary for warfighting has been built exclusively on the assumption of the Americans coming to the rescue. I thought that this was a good opportunity to note that, the US has explicitly sought to enfeeble and effectively disarm the Europeans. Ever since the end of World War II, but particularly following the collapse of communism in the late 80s and the early 1990s, there was at that time a push by French and German leaders and the burgeoning European Union. It was the European Community at the time, but it was to become the European Union, that there were high-level discussions and decisions made about integrating defense, security, and foreign policy across Europe, with the explicit purpose of reducing US influence over the continent. This was codified in the highly controversial but historic Maastricht Treaty in 1992, and France and Germany also created a parallel force to NATO called Eurocorps. The US was extremely unhappy about this, publicly and privately threatened countries not to join, threatened France and Germany not to push ahead with this. There are some, they're largely forgotten now, but there are some amazingly illuminating and revealing comments made by assorted US and NATO officials about NATO's true role. In my piece, I quote Alexander Haig, who was the former NATO Supreme Commander, and he noted in 2002 that the US's military presence in Germany, which is drowning under the weight of US military installations and has tens of thousands of soldiers there at any one time, he openly admitted this is a bona fide of our economic success. It keeps European markets open to us. If we weren't there, those markets will probably be more difficult to access. So NATO is a means of ensuring that European countries remain open to US economic domination, both on a consumer level, but also via compelling NATO members to buy expensive military equipment, which often doesn't work or doesn't work very well, but also ensuring that no major rivals or economic competitors emerge globally. So, Politico signed off by saying that, by investing heavily in a war strategy built on US support that may never materialize, Europe risks preparing for the wrong conflict. My argument would be, Europe has always been preparing for the wrong conflict. The threat has never come from the East. It has been necessary to create this chimera of a threat from, first the Soviet Union, then Russia, to justify US economic rape and pillage of Europe over many decades. They now seem to have achieved that to the extent that they feel they can step away from any military commitment in Europe by token of the anti-Russian sanctions, which have destroyed European economies and made them even more dependent on the US than before.